name of Allie. And just before her sister's wedding, by the way, Allie is 22 years old. She is Down syndrome, and she has a plethora of health issues that are at times so debilitating that she has to spend a lot of time with doctors. She has to spend a lot of time under nurse's care, a lot of time where a normal 22-year-old, a normal person be able to live her life or his life. She doesn't have those privileges. During this time, it's her sister's wedding, and her sister are very close. Her sister is actually 6 years older than her, and she is, I guess you could say, the flower girl of her sister's wedding. And Allie's a very interesting lady, very interesting. When I read about her, it conjured up somewhat of emotion, you know, just the conditions of her life, but yet the joy of her heart to just live, you know, and just kind of postpone almost inevitably the inevitable, that she knows that she could have a seizure, it doesn't matter. She's just a happy girl, you know. During the course of the wedding, all the planning is done, all the flowers are hung, preacher's there, they're in tuxes, she's in the dress, and it comes to the point where she's already walked down the aisle, and she's already did her thing with the flowers, which took a while. She's kind of, you know, but she got down there. She got down there, and comes to the point where she steps up on the platform with her sister, who is the bride, and her future brother-in-law. And her brother turns to his to-be wife and says, they exchange vows. Well, one of the brother-in-law's friends, who Allie's somewhat close to, like a friend of the family, very well-to-do guy, financially, very good-looking guy, physically, he steps on the platform, and he reaches in his pocket, and he grabs the ring, and he hands it to the groom. He reaches in his other pocket, and he grabs another ring, and he looks at Allie. He says, after this is over, I would like to propose to her. She just burst into tears. Like, are you serious? This Brad Pitt, this whatever, you know, guy you want to get, he's proposing to me. He's doing this to me. And she's just in tears, and the church is in tears too, you know. And she looks at him and says, you chose me. You could have had anybody. You could have picked anyone, but you chose me. You knew that I am not normal, and under no circumstance. No, there has to be. It did say this in the story. There has to be underlying psychological issues there. It does. For a person to live in that kind of condition, it has to be. But you chose me. We go to verse 16. I made it a point not to read the whole book, the whole chapter here. Even though the chapter, the verses before amplify what is being said here, I believe it would be redundant for me just to point that out again. You know, we know that Christ says that he is the vine, and that we abide in him, that we ask whatever we want. We know from verse 5, he says that you can do nothing without me. Nothing, absolutely nothing. Then he says, if you want anything, just ask, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. So here we have all these stipulations and all these, okay, I have to abide in him, and I have to do this, and I have to do this. I have to abide in his word. I must follow him. I must. And this, verse 16, I'm going to go ahead and read it. You did not choose me, but I chose you, and appointed you that you would go and bear fruit, and that fruit would remain, so that whatever you ask of the Father in my name, he may give to you. Jesus told his disciples, his closest partners, his pupils, his sheep, you did not choose me, I chose you. Jesus said that his disciples were chosen. He chose them and he knew them, every one of them, intimately. According to Psalms 139, there is not a single aspect of our lives, from verse 1 to verse 9, that God has already calculated in his mind. He already knows our flaws. He knows our weaknesses. He knows that on some levels we're liabilities. He knows every single thing about every single one that he has ever made. Everything. Things that we don't know about ourselves. Things that have yet to manifest themselves or come to the surface. He knows them. He knows them. But yet, like Allie and her to-be husband, or husband now, he chose us. He still did it. So, Jesus has chosen every one of us in this room. Every one of us in this room. First off, I believe it's critical. I believe it's critical to understand what being chosen means. It's critical for us to understand in our ministry, as ministers, as aspiring ministers, and currently serving ministers, what it means to be chosen. I want you guys to know the privileges of being chosen. It's a privilege to be called by his name. And we're going to look at some ways. Let's examine some privileges of being chosen. Number one, the first privilege is the freedom to be simply ourselves. Number one privilege is freedom just to be ourselves. We look at the text. I've always found it weird. Not weird, I guess you could say, but it's not coincidental that Christ puts first that, hey, you did not choose me. When he could have said, I chose you, you didn't choose me. He chooses to put that particular phrase first. You did not choose me, but I chose you. So one of the privileges, we don't need to act the part. That's chosen. We don't need to put on a mask and try to be able to conjure something out of ourselves that we already are. If I was a bishop, a pastor, let's scratch that. If Dr. Caldwell invited you to teach his class, I would reckon that he would try to know something about you and know enough about you that you would be able to stand before his children or his students and be able to teach them without you having to worry about, did he make the right choice? It wouldn't be necessarily a question because he knew you. He knew if it was before block, he knew your doctrine. I'm pretty sure he'd have a conversation with you before he let you loose with the sheep. He knew you. He knows you. And in the realm of spirituality, in the realm of Christ with us, we do not have to worry about that. Playing a part. We can be exactly who we are. Exactly who we are. Because I tell you one thing. If you're not, you've just committed suicide. Because he made you. He made you. He made you. He made you and he knew what he was doing. He knew your flaws and everything that you are is already calculated. So when you deviate from that, that's when you commit suicide. He wants you. He doesn't want your brother. He doesn't want John Piper. He has John Piper. He didn't make John Piper. He made you. He doesn't want you to try to mock and preach like your preacher, the greatest preacher you've ever heard. He wants you. He wants you to preach like he has put in you to preach. He wants your uniqueness. Not John Piper's uniqueness, not Paul Washer's uniqueness, or any other preacher, because he made you distinctly different from everybody in this world. And he chose you. He knows you. You're going to keep going back to that. It's always a question Just a recurring question, why? Why? He chose you. We don't need to be afraid of who we are. That's another privilege in the freedom bracket. We don't need to be afraid that, Father, you know that I'm a flight risk. I'm a flight risk. You know I struggle in areas with things that I feel I just can't conquer. Habits that I can't kick. Things and thoughts that I can't crucify. He knows these things. But we don't have to be petrified that, oh, does this disqualify you? Because you were qualified from you were born. Seriously. Before you were born, you were qualified. The second privilege is simply the 100% certainty of a fruitful life. The second privilege is 100% certainty of a fruitful life. Fruitful life, sorry. We're going to go back to the text just to show that. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you would go and that you would bear fruit. And not only bear fruit, and that your fruit would remain. It would remain. We have some seasoned preachers in the house. We have some, like I said, aspiring preachers in the house. Personal note, I have, not consecutively, but I've been in ministry for 9 years. My little time in the ministry, I have seen so much, had so much doubt and fear that it isn't funny. And this is the biggest one. Simply, did I succeed? Did I succeed? I've stood by a few of my youth group's caskets. I've stood by, as a 17-year-old boy, my own mother's casket, wondering, was my life productive enough that she's seen the light in me and came to Christ? I've held conversations and counseling sessions with members in my youth group, and I see them grow. They start growing, and then they just fall away, and you're just almost prostrate before God, like, my fruit, what was growing isn't growing anymore. Was I successful at all? Was I successful when you have people come up to the altar and they're committing to Christ, they're confessing habits, they're confessing, they're opening themselves to the spirit of conviction, and then you see them kind of trail back off into the world. You wonder to yourself, was and is your ministry successful, or is it a fiasco? Is it the biggest epic failure ever? And that's a constant thing with us. Because most of the stuff that you'll do, most of the seeds that you plant, most of them, the seeds you'll never see. The success margin is so small. But Christ is saying here in this scripture, hold on. Hold on. First, yes, I chose you. And you didn't choose me. But in choosing you, I ordained you to be fruitful. You have no choice but to be fruitful. You have no choice but to bear fruit. Not only just fruit that's momentary, but fruit that will remain. It will outlive you. Lastly, under the point of second privilege, I believe that, as I told you guys from the beginning, that God is laying a lot on us in this chapter that we have to do. I believe here in this verse, he's taking the ball back. He's saying, now here's what you can do. I'm just going to show you that this is what I expect of you, and so that you know that you can ascertain to it. You cannot measure up to this. So I'm going to take the ball back from you. It's not in your hands anymore. So one of the privileges of being 100% fruitful is that you have no control over your life. You have no control over your ministry. You are available and you are a vessel. Available and a vessel. So we see the first privilege was freedom. Freedom to be ourselves. Freedom not to have to play the part. Freedom not to fear that which we don't know. The unknown. that we hold or that abides in us. The second privilege was the 100% certainty that we will bear fruit. We will bear fruit. Fear not, we will be fruitful. As I close, there is a flip side to the coin. We're ministers here. We always want to be careful that we are in His will. Being a minister, being a pastor, being a preacher does not disqualify you from having to have Christ as your centerfold of your life. Therefore, everything that I've outlined here toward the privileges of someone who is chosen in the ministry is the complete opposite for those who think they're chosen, who aren't chosen. So your 100% certainty of fruitfulness turns into 0. The freedom that you have of just being yourself will lead to condemnation. Always have to, 1 Corinthians 13:5, we always have to examine ourselves. And we always have to conduct ourselves in the way of godliness. We have to make sure that Christ stays before us. We have to make sure that He is not an accessory, but He is the centerfold of our lives. As I said, as ministers, we are not disqualified from heaven. Christ has disqualified us from heaven. And the moment we don't have Him is the moment we are disqualified. So I just encourage all you ministers out there in this room, just be available to Him. I encourage you to be available to Him and not fret about your ministry. He is not only sovereign throughout the world, He is sovereign in your life, in our life, our ministries, in our families, in our youth groups, in our sheeps, in our churches, in our neighborhoods, in our societies, our nations, our cities. It doesn't matter. He's sovereign. Thank you.